There is a particular kind of quiet that falls over a fortress the moment before everything comes apart, and I have learned to hear it coming. I heard it that night in the dark of the lower passage, with my brother's hand crushed in mine and the cold torch smoke burning my eyes, 2 strides from the postern gate and freedom. Then, the bar of the gate dropped on the far side with a sound like a grave closing, and somewhere above us a voice I had been taught to trust gave the order to seal every door in the keep, and I understood that the man I had run from was not the man I should have feared. My brother made a small sound. I put myself in front of him out of an instinct older than thought, and a hand closed around my wrist out of the dark, large, certain, impossible to break, and I did not know, in that frozen breath, whether it had come to save us or to finish us. I will tell you whose hand it was. But first you have to understand how a woman with a perfect plan to escape a king ended up trapped in his arms in front of his entire court, and why the worst thing that ever happened to me turned out to be a man simply refusing to set me down. My plan was perfect. My legs gave out before I reached the door. My name was Sable, and I had never in my life wanted less to be in a room than I wanted to be in the great hall of the Iron Throne on the night of the selection. The selection is how the Alpha King takes a Luna, and it is not a courtship. Every unmated woman of age in the bound packs is summoned to the capital, presented in the great hall, and entered on the roll, and from that roll the king chooses. There is no declining. A woman whose name is called and who is chosen belongs to the capital for the rest of her life. Luna of the Iron Throne, never again her own, never again going home. For the highborn daughters it was the prize of a lifetime, and they had come in their dyed silks practically vibrating with hope. I had come because the summons is law, and the penalty for hiding from it falls on your whole household, and I had exactly one piece of household left in the world, and his name was Tam. Tam was 11. Our parents were 3 years dead. Fever took our mother, a bad winter took our father, and since then it had been the 2 of us in a cold croft on the edge of the Greywater Pack's land, and I had kept us both alive by means I am not going to detail, except to say that I had not had a full night's sleep or a full day's food in longer than I could remember. Because when there is 1 blanket and 1 bowl between 2 people, the older one lies about being cold and being full. He had carved me a little wolf out of pine that winter, a clumsy lopsided thing with 1 ear bigger than the other, and made me promise to keep it in my pocket, so I would not be lonely on the road to the capital. I had it on me that night. I have it on me still. It is the only thing I have never once lied to him about. So you see my problem with the selection. If my name was called, and I was chosen, I would be kept in the capital forever, and Tam, 11, alone, on the edge of a hard-pack's land, would not last a season. I was not a woman with a dream of being a queen. I was a woman with a dependent and a death sentence dressed as an honor. And I had made a plan. The plan was this: faint, or appear to. In the crush of 200 women being presented, in the press and the heat and the long wait, all I had to do was slip toward the edge, let myself sag against a pillar as though the excitement had overcome me, and in the fuss of a swooning, nobody be helped out a side door by some bored servant, and from there to the kitchens, the yards, the gates, and the long road home to my brother before my name was ever read off the roll. I had walked the route twice that afternoon pretending to be lost. I had counted the doors. It was a good plan. It was a careful plan. I want that on the record, because what actually happened has been told and retold across every pack in the realm as a love story. And it was not a love story. It was a catastrophe. The love came later, and it had to fight its way through. The Alpha King's name was Ronan, and the first thing I ever noticed about him was that he seemed almost as reluctant to be there as I was. He sat the Iron Throne at the head of the hall, young for a king, broad and dark and still, and he received the presentation of 200 women with the expression of a man enduring a very long and very formal weather. He did not lean forward at the pretty ones. He did not lean back at the plain ones. He sat through the whole glittering parade with a kind of remote, dutiful patience, and beside him, leaning to murmur in his ear between each name, stood an older man in chancellor's gray whose attention never wavered for a heartbeat. A man who watched the hall the way the king did not, sharp and constant, missing nothing. I would learn that man's name was Vane, and that he had been chancellor of the Iron Throne since Ronan was a boy king, and that the remote patience I mistook for the king's coldness was something a great deal stranger and worse. But I did not know any of that yet. I knew only that the king looked like a man going through motions someone else had arranged, and that this suited me. Because a king who is barely paying attention is a king who will not notice one nobody sagging toward a side door. They had given us all water when we came in. I remember that, after, when it mattered. Plain cups of water passed down the rows of waiting women by the chancellor's own servants, a small courtesy against the heat of the crowded hall, and I remember being grateful for it, because I had not drunk all day, and I remember it tasting faintly bitter and thinking nothing of it, because everything in the capital was strange to me, and why should the water not be strange too? I drank it. That was my mistake, though it would be a long time before I understood it was a mistake at all. Or whose. I waited until the presentation was deep underway and the hall was a sea of distracted, hopeful bodies. And then I began to drift, the way I had practiced, toward the edge and the doors. I felt the heat. I let myself feel it. I let my steps go vague. I was 3 rows from the side passage, close enough to count the iron studs on the door I had chosen, when the floor of the great hall did something floors are not supposed to do, which is to tilt and go soft and rush up at the side of my face. Here is the thing I need you to understand, because the whole realm got it wrong, and I got it wrong longest of all. I was not pretending anymore. Somewhere between the 3rd row and the door, the feint stopped being my plan and became a real thing happening to me. A gray tide closing over my sight far too fast and far too completely for nerves. And the last clear thought I had as my legs dissolved was, not there goes my escape. It was, this is wrong, this is not how fainting feels, something is wrong, and then the hall went out like a snuffed candle, and I fell. I did not hit the floor. I have gone over the next part with the dozen people who witnessed it, because I was not conscious for most of it, and I wanted to know exactly how my careful life was ended. What they tell me is this. The Alpha King of the Iron Throne, who had sat through 200 presentations without rising once, who had not so much as shifted his weight at the daughters of his greatest houses, came up off the Iron Throne between one breath and the next, and crossed the width of the great hall faster than a man that size has any right to move, scattering the presentation, scattering the chancellor's careful order, and caught a fainting nobody 3 rows from a side door before her head reached the stone. And then, he did not put her down. I woke in his arms in a silence so total, I thought for a moment I had died after all. 200 women, the assembled court, the chancellor, the guards, the entire great hall of the Iron Throne stood frozen and staring. And at the center of all that staring was the king. On one knee on the floor he had crossed too fast, holding a strange unconscious commoner against him as though she were the last warm thing in a burning house, and refusing, visibly and absolutely, to let anyone take her from him. My king. The chancellor's voice, smooth, very close. She is overcome. A servant will see to her. If you will return to the throne, we can resume no, said the king. It was the first word I heard him say, and he said it without looking up, and there was a rough confusion under it that I would come to know very well. Hands had come forward to take me, servants, a healer, the careful machinery of a court correcting an irregularity, and the king had turned his shoulder against all of them, and his arms had not opened, and on his face, when I tilted my swimming head enough to see it, was the expression of a man who has just discovered his own body is no longer entirely taking his orders, and is as alarmed about it as everyone else. My king, the chancellor tried again, and I heard under the smoothness the first thin thread of something that was not smooth at all. You cannot simply, I am aware, Ronan said, that I cannot. I am aware that this is a commoner, that the selection is not concluded, that there are 200 women of rank in this hall, and I have not so much as learned this one's name. He looked down at me then, and his eyes were baffled and furious, and not, I want to be clear, in any way tender. He looked at me the way you look at a door that has locked itself against you. I am aware of all of it. I am telling you that I am not going to put her down, and I am telling you that I do not know why, and I would take it as a kindness if no one asked me to explain a thing I cannot, in front of the entire court, before I have even stood up. That is the moment the realm made into a love story. From the inside, it was two strangers equally horrified, one of whom could not stand up because the other would not be released, while a hall full of witnesses watched the most powerful wolf in the territories malfunction over a fainting nobody, and a chancellor's face slowly stopped being smooth. By the time I could stand on my own, the side door I had counted the studs on was shut and guarded, and so was every other door, and my perfect plan was as dead as the candle the hall had gone out like, and I was, by the only ceremony that mattered, chosen, because a wolf the king will not release is a wolf the king has claimed, and 200 witnesses had seen him refuse to let me go. I spent the first 3 days as Luna-elect trying to leave, and the king spent them genuinely unable to understand why anyone would. This is the part that is funny, and I will let it be funny, because God knows the rest of it is not. Ronan was not a cruel man or a possessive one. He was, I came to realize, an honestly bewildered one. A king who had been told his whole life that being chosen by him was the greatest fortune that could befall a woman, and who therefore could not form the concept of a woman trying to escape it. He kept catching me at doors. Not dramatically, I was not chained, but the wolf in him would not settle when I was out of his sight, and so he kept turning up wherever I was drifting toward an exit, with the faintly hunted look of a man being dragged around his own fortress by an instinct he could not switch off, and asking me, with real and maddening sincerity, where I thought I was going. Home, I said, the third time, because I was tired and frightened and past being careful. He looked at me as though I had said I was going to the moon. This is your home. You are to be Luna of the Iron Throne. I have a home. I stopped myself before the word brother got out, because I had already learned that in this court information was currency, and I did not know yet who was buying. I have responsibilities you have taken me away from, and a life that did not stop existing because your arms would not open in the great hall. You did not choose me, my king. Your wolf seized me, and you have been too proud or too confused to admit you do not want this any more than I do. So let us be honest with each other, since no one else in this place is, and find a way to undo it before we are both bound to a mistake. I expected anger. A king does not get called a mistake by a commoner. What I got was worse, and it was the first crack in everything I thought I understood. He did not get angry. He got quiet, a careful, listening quiet that did not belong on the face of a remote and dutiful king, and he said, slowly, like a man testing a floor he has just realized might not be solid, "You think I do not want this." A pause. Do you know? I have not been able to decide what I want about anything in a very long time. I sit in council, and the decisions are already made when I arrive. I sit at the selection, and the roll is already arranged. And then you fell, 3 days ago, and for the first time in years I wanted something so badly and so immediately that my body did it before my mind could be consulted. And I have spent 3 days assuming that was the wolf. He looked at me. But the wolf does not arrange my counsels. The wolf did not pour 200 cups of water. Why is it, Sable, that the only thing in this fortress I have chosen for myself in 5 years is the one thing my chancellor cannot stop trying to take back? I did not have an answer, but the question went into me like a key into a lock I had not known was there, and I started, for the first time, to be afraid of the right man. If you have ever sat across from a person you came in braced to fight, and felt the whole shape of the danger quietly rotate to point somewhere else entirely. If you have ever realized the trap you walked into was not the one you were warned about, then you know the cold that went down my spine in that room, and you know it is not a thing you can unfeel. I am going to tell you what was truly in that water, and who poured it, and what it cost me to prove it with my brother's life in the balance. Stay with me to the sealed gate and through it. The plan I made to escape this king was the worst plan I ever made, and thank every god of the iron reach that my legs gave out before I could see it through. The water was the thread, and I pulled it, because being low and overlooked has exactly one advantage, and it is that you know how the unglamorous things of a household actually work. I had tasted bitter in that cup, and I had felt a faint come over me that no nervous girl's faint ever felt like. Too fast, too total, wrong, and I had spent 3 years keeping a sick household alive on a healer's scraps of knowledge, enough to know that there is a root, a common cheap one, that steeps bitter and drops a body into a deep gray swoon within the hour and leaves no mark. It is used, in small doses, to calm a panicking wolf or still a man for the setting of a bone. In a larger dose it puts you down. In the wrong dose it stops you. 200 cups of water, poured by the chancellor's own servants, handed to 200 women on the one night the king would choose a Luna. I went looking, the way a scrub hand can go looking where a Luna elect cannot, and I found the truth in the chancellor's own stores. Because powerful men grow careless about the places they think no one important will ever look. Vane had drugged the selection. Not all the cups, I think, that would have been noticed. Enough of them, the right ones, to make certain that the candidates he had not chosen drifted and swooned and underwhelmed, while the one woman he intended, his own grandniece, the Lady Greer, who had not been given the bitter water, stood bright and poised among a hall of strangely listless rivals, the obvious and only sensible choice. He had not been arranging a marriage. He had been arranging an outcome. The way I came to understand, he had arranged every outcome of Ronan's reign, since the king was a grieving boy of 17, and Vane was the kindly regent who took the weight of ruling off his young shoulders, and simply, year by year, never gave it back. And I had ruined it. I, a nobody 3 rows from a side door, had drunk my bitter cup, and fainted on schedule, and fallen, not into obscurity as designed, but straight into the path of a king whose own suppressed wolf, starved of anything real for 5 managed years, had come up off the throne at the sight of me like a drowning man breaking the surface. The one thing the chancellor could not arrange was the bond. He had drugged the whole hall to control the choice, and the drug had thrown the king's true mate under his hands, and now there was a commoner Luna elect with a sharp eye and no rank to lose, pulling threads in his careful tapestry. The feint everyone in the realm called the weakness of a nervous girl was the one moment the chancellor's control slipped. That is the thing I want the songs to get right, if they get nothing else. I did not fall because I was weak. I fell because I was poisoned, and the poison is the only reason I am alive, and the only reason Ronan is free, and I will never stop finding that the blackest and best joke that fate ever played on me. Vane was not a man who lost a piece without taking 2 in return, and the day after I started asking the kitchen's quiet questions, he found the piece I could not afford to lose. He found Tam, I do not know how, except that finding things is what a man like Vane does. And a Luna elect who keeps slipping toward the gates is a woman with somewhere to slip to, and it does not take a genius to put a watcher on the Greywater Road. What I know is that I was brought a folded note in an unfamiliar hand, and inside it was a curl of pine shavings and a clumsy lopsided carving of a wolf with one ear bigger than the other, and nothing else. Because nothing else was needed. I had told no one in that fortress about my brother. The note told me that someone knew everything, that my brother was no longer on the edge of a hard-packed land but somewhere within a powerful man's reach, and that my silence was now the price of his life. This is the place where the woman I had been, careful, quiet, surviving in the gaps, had to die, because careful and quiet was exactly the cage Vane was counting on. He had built his whole power on people choosing the small, safe silence. A chancellor who drugs a selection and steals a child is a man betting his entire life that the people he wrongs will keep their heads down to keep their loved ones breathing. Because that is what the low and the frightened have always done. Because it is what I had always done. I stopped doing it. Not because I was brave. Because I finally understood that a man who holds your brother to buy your silence does not give the brother back when you stay silent. He gives the brother back never. Because a silenced witness is a loose end he simply hasn't tidied yet. The only road where Tam lived ran straight through the thing I was most afraid to do, which was to stop being careful and start being loud, in front of the most dangerous man in the realm, with the worst possible timing. I went to the king. I want to tell you I had a clever plan. I did not. I had a curl of pine shavings and the truth about the water and a brother somewhere in the dark. And I walked into Ronan's private chambers past guards who no longer quite dared stop me, and I put the little carved wolf on the table between us, and I told him all of it. The drug, the stores, Greer, the note. Tam, 5 managed years and a regent who never gave the reins back. I told the Alpha King of the Iron Throne that his most trusted man had been quietly governing him since he was a boy, and that the proof was that the one decision Ronan had ever made for himself, me, was the only one Vane had moved heaven and earth to undo. And I watched a man wake up. It is the closest thing to a resurrection I have ever seen. The remote, dutiful patience I had taken for coldness 3 days before turned out to be the face of a man half asleep in his own life. And as I talked, I saw him come awake under it, year by managed year, until what was looking at me across that table was not a bewildered king being dragged around by his wolf, but a furious one who had just realized exactly how long he had been led. The carving, he said at last, very low, picking up Tam's lopsided wolf and turning it in his fingers. He sent you your own brother's toy to tell you he had the boy. Yes, and you brought it to me anyway, knowing he could be watching, knowing what it might cost the boy if I am the wrong man to have trusted with it. He set the wolf down with terrible care. Why? Because you are the only person in this fortress, I said, who has never once arranged me. Everyone else in your court has handled me like a piece on a board since the moment I fell. You are the only one who keeps asking me where I think I am going as though my answer is mine to give. I am gambling my brother's life, that a man who would not put me down in the great hall is a man who will not put me down now. My voice did not shake, which surprised me. Prove me right, my king. I am very tired of being the only one in the room who chooses things. That is the night the cold open promised you. The sealed gate, the torch smoke, the hand out of the dark. Now you know how I came to be running through Vane's reach with my brother's hand in mine. Because Ronan did prove me right, and proving me right meant moving fast and quiet to take Tam back before Vane knew the king had woken. And it meant the chancellor, sensing the board tilt, made his last move first. He had Tam in the keep. He had meant the boy as a leash. When his watchers brought word that the Luna-elect had been hours in the king's private chambers, and the king had quietly summoned the captains Vane did not own, the chancellor understood that the leash had failed, and a held child becomes, very quickly, a held witness no one can be allowed to question. He moved Tam in the dark toward the postern gate, and a fast horse, and a quiet drop into the grey water no one would dredge, and I, because Ronan had told me where the chancellor's men kept the things they did not want found, a king remembering his own fortress for the first time in years, was already in those passages. And I reached my brother at the foot of the stair, and I got his hand in mine, 2 strides from the gate, and the gate bar dropped on the far side, and Vane's voice gave the order to seal the keep, and a hand came out of the dark and closed around my wrist. It was Ronan's. He had come down himself, the way he had crossed the great hall himself, because the wolf that would not let me out of its sight had become a man who would not let me face the dark alone. And behind him came Garrick, his second, and the captains the chancellor did not own, and Torchlight, and the end of 5 managed years. Vane did not go quietly, and a man who poisons a hall keeps a poison for the end. Cornered at the sealed gate, exposed, he did the arithmetic of a man with nothing left to lose, and he went for the king, a thin blade, fast, aimed at the throat of the boy he had ruled, and the man who had finally woken, and the captains were a half-step too far, and Garrick a half-step too slow. I was not slow. I had spent 3 days learning that my body acts before my mind is consulted, and it acted now. I put myself into the line of that blade, with Tam's hand still locked in mine. And I got my free arm up, and the knife meant for the king's throat went through the meat of my forearm instead, a bright cold shock and then a wash of heat, my blood coming down over the little carved wolf I had snatched off the king's table and carried through the dark like a talisman. I did not let go of my brother. I have never, in any disaster, let go of my brother. Then Garrick had Vane, and the captains had the gate, and Ronan had me, both of us down on the cold stone. The king's hands pressed to my bleeding arm, and his careful patience shattered into something raw and enormous. The bond in him loose at last and roaring that it had nearly, on the very first night it had been allowed to want anything, lost the thing it wanted. You put yourself in front of a blade, he said, on the day you finally decided to trust me. If you had died proving you were right, then I would have been right, which is more than most people manage. I got the words out through my teeth. Tam was sobbing into my side, alive, unmarked, his small hand still crushed in mine. It is an arm, Ronan. I have survived worse winters than this on less blood. Stop looking like that. You are frightening my brother, and he has had a very long night, and so, I find, have I. The Alpha King of the Iron Throne laughed, wet and broken, with a chancellor in chains and a commoner bleeding in his arms, and an 11-year-old between them, and for the first time in 5 years it was entirely his own. The realm shook, and this time I was awake to feel it. A king is one thing. A king who wakes up is an earthquake. Ronan took back the reins of his own throne in a single hard season, and the taking back rang through every pack in the territories. Because a regent chancellor, who had quietly governed the Iron Reach for half a generation, does not fall without the whole map shifting under him. Vane was tried in open court, drugged selection, a stolen child, a blade drawn on the king, and the great houses who had grown comfortable dealing with the chancellor rather than the boy discovered, all at once, that there was a man on the Iron Throne again, and that he had a Luna who had counted the iron studs on his side doors and missed nothing, and that the days of arranging the king were over. It made the powerful nervous. It should have. Lady Greer, who had been as much a piece on her great-uncle's board as I had been, was sent home unmarried and, I am told, vastly relieved, and we write to each other now, which no one who saw us across that hall would ever have predicted. My arm healed slow and stiff. The blade went deep, and the cold of that passage got into the wound, and on hard mornings the hand does not close all the way. I find I do not mind. I have a lopsided wooden wolf, with my own dried blood gone dark in the grain of it, and a stiff arm that will not quite close, and between them they are the proof that on the worst night of my life I did not let go of the two things that were mine. My brother, and the first choice I ever made that no one had arranged for me. It is a year now, as I set this down, and Tam is asleep down the corridor in a room with a real hearth and too many blankets, having spent the evening teaching the Alpha King of the Iron Reach to carve, badly, a second wolf to keep the first one company. Ronan is hopeless at it. He has cut himself twice and produced something that looks less like a wolf than a potato with regrets, and he will not stop trying. Because my brother told him the first one had to have a friend, and Ronan has discovered, late and all at once, the particular helplessness of a man who has decided a child's good opinion is worth more than his dignity. He is not a remote man. I want that set down plainly, since the whole realm spent 5 years mistaking a managed silence for the coldness of a great king. He is a warm one who was kept half asleep so long he forgot the heat was his, and watching him wake into it this year, into wanting things, choosing things, arguing with me about things at a volume that scandalizes the older servants, has been the truest pleasure of my life. We are two people who spent years surviving by being small and quiet and easy to overlook. We are not small or quiet anymore, either of us, and the fortress has had to adjust. He came to find me just now, where I was writing this by the fire, with a bandage on his thumb and the potato wolf in his hand, and read over my shoulder the way he is not supposed to and always does, and asked what I was setting down. I told him I was writing the story of the night his wolf would not put me down. He was quiet a moment, in the way he gets when he is about to say a true thing he has been carrying. You keep writing it as the wolf, he said. I have let it stand, because for 3 days I believed it myself, and because the truth makes me sound like a man who knew far too little about his own heart, which I was. He set the little carving down beside its blood-stained brother. But I have thought about it for a year, Sable, and I will say it now while you are writing it where it cannot be unwritten. I did not come off that throne because the wolf seized me. I came off it because I saw you fall, 3 rows from a door you had been eyeing all night, fighting that swoon every step, a woman clearly trying to leave the one room every other woman was desperate to be chosen in, and some part of me that Vane had kept asleep for 5 years woke up and thought, before the wolf, before the bond, before any of it, that one. The one trying to escape. She is the only honest person in this hall, and I am not going to let her hit the floor. The wolf agreed with me a heartbeat later. But the heartbeat was mine. He almost smiled. So do not write that my wolf would not put you down. Write that I would not. I have wanted to confess it for a year, and been ashamed of how little I understood myself when it mattered most. The catch was mine, Sable. It was the first thing I ever caught on purpose. So I will leave you with the question I still cannot settle, and I would genuinely love to know what you think. He swears now that the man chose before the wolf did, that he saw the one woman trying to flee and decided, in the half-second before instinct, that he would not let me fall. But I only fell because I was drugged. If Vane had not poisoned that cup, I would have walked out the side door clean, and Ronan would never have caught anything at all. So who truly made this happen? The king who chose to catch the falling girl, or the chancellor whose poison put her in his path? Did Ronan save me, or did Vane, by accident, give me to him? I have a stiff arm and a sleeping brother, and a year of being chosen on purpose, and I still cannot decide whether I owe my whole life to the best man in the realm or the worst. Tell me your verdict below. I read every one, and so, he has confessed, does the king, And if you want to stay in the Iron Reach with us a while longer, comment the little wolf, and I will tell you next what happened when the other packs that had spent 5 years dealing with a chancellor instead of a king came to the capital to find out, at last, exactly what kind of man we had let them wake. So if your own legs ever give out 2 strides from the door you were running for, wherever you are listening from tonight, try to fall where someone honest can catch you. It is the only part of my perfect ruined plan I would tell anyone to keep.